Apologies, just realized my mic was muted. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of the Future of Energy series, Women in Charge, under the theme of Breaking the Bias. And this is powered by KE. My name is Seher Abbas, and I will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. We have a star-studded panel lined up for you today, and I'm extremely honored to be able to moderate this discussion today. So a little about myself. I'm currently working at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group in infrastructure. And my areas of focus that I focus on in IFC are energy, urban infrastructure, transport, and logistics. So that's about my day job. Today, I'm here in the capacity of the co-chair of Karachi Hub for Women in Energy, Pakistan. Women in Energy is a professional network that supports women working in the field of energy in Pakistan. And we've been engaging in this space for over 4 or 5 years now. I've been the co-chair for Karachi since 2019. And we're a group of 7 women, very dedicated and passionate about improving gender parity in the energy sector. So let's move ahead and talk more about today's panel discussion. So in Pakistan, women have held really high offices, including the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the National Assembly, leader of the opposition, as well as federal ministers and judges. However, this is not a norm. These are unfortunately one-offs. Pakistan ranked 153 out of 156 in the Global Gender Index. And this was 2 spots lower than where we were a year ago. According to Pakistan's scorecard, Pakistan has ranked 152 in economic participation and opportunity, 144 in education attainment, and 153 in health and survival out of 156 countries. That just shows that the state of women in Pakistan is far from ideal, to say the least. Just to give you an example, women in the energy sector amount to around 4% of the workforce. That's a very, very small number for a country that has 48.54% women. And we at Women in Energy as well are trying to push for increasing participation of women in the energy sector. So what is something that can be created? And we talk about women in leadership positions, but I feel that there is need to look way back, starting from the basics, from education, from culture. And I feel the ecosystem, an entire ecosystem is required that ensures that women thrive, that ensures that women are able to push through and are educated and have access to health, access to education, access to justice. And I feel today's panel discussion, we will be talking about that. An ecosystem that gives women the choice, basically the choice to be able to work if they want to have a seat at the table, or for that sake, be able to design that table and then decide who gets to be on that table or not. Leaving my introduction at that, I would like to kickstart this panel with introducing our first panelist, Miss Maheen Rahman. And Miss Maheen doesn't need a lot of introduction, but I will give a very brief intro, and my apologies if I'm not doing justice to it. So Ms. Rahman has 20 years of experience in international banking, research, and asset management. She has recently been appointed as the CEO of Infra Zameen Pakistan, a for-profit Karandaz and Infraco Asia joint venture, which seeks to provide credit enhancements facilities to infrastructure projects. Ms. Rahman started her career with Merrill Lynch in their investment banking group. Post Merrill Lynch, she joined ABN AMRO Group in Singapore in the corporate finance department. She has also served as head of research for BMA Capital and CEO for IGI Funds and Alfala Investments. Ms. Rahman holds a bachelor's in economics from Lahore University of Management Sciences and a master's in finance and economics from Warwick Business School in the UK. So, welcome, Maheen. Really happy to have you on the panel.
Thank you so much, Seher, and thank you for that very nice introduction.
So, just to kickstart our discussion, something that I would be really interested in hearing from you would be working in, we were just talking about how energy is a very male dominated industry. So is investment banking and finance and infrastructure finance. So, what are some of the challenges you faced, especially you've been in the leadership position for a very long time? So, what are some of the biases you think people have about women leaders? So, over to
Okay,
you for the second
thank
question.
you. I think, first of all, let me just say that I think this is no better time to be a woman, even in Pakistan or even in the rest of the world. And even though we have a terrible track record in gender diversity in Pakistan, I think just simply given the sheer volume of effort that is being put towards, put towards women empowerment here, especially in the last month or so, it is very encouraging to see. I don't think we even celebrated Women's Day that much when I was starting work. I think the key thing to try and see is how can we move towards developing women to actually want to participate more in the corporate sector. So bias is on their side, and this year's theme of Women's Day is breaking the bias. So how do we actually do that? And I think you raised some very interesting points there on education and going back towards society and culture. I think let's talk a bit about what happens to girls in primary school, what happens to girls in at home when they are very young. So I think that's where the biases really begin to show in. And some of those biases are cultural, some of them are, and they're so ingrained into young minds that by the time a girl graduates or she gets an education, and the concept of giving her career priority or even giving financial independence priority is not usually there. And I think we must start by looking at that bias first for Pakistan, because I think in order for anyone to move ahead, they have to want it, and they have to be focused on it. So I think you start from the absolute basics, and I think in school as well. I've noticed it in some of the best schools in Karachi. They will ask the girls to go play with the dolls and ask the boys to go play with the trucks. So I think it's a general level of societal awareness that needs to be focused on and created. I think we're very lucky in this day and age that there is so much focus being given to female empowerment. I think one of the other things that will significantly help is just the ability that our youngsters have to access what's on the internet and to gain awareness. If it doesn't come from the society, it will certainly come from the rest of the world. And I think, given the kind of globalization trends that we are seeing, and also the kind of access that kids have towards these issues and concepts, I think that right will soon be demanded, and it's already being demanded by the younger workforce. So it's our responsibility, I think, to harness that in a way which is productive. And towards that end, I just feel that it's not just exclusively about education. Yes, there's a huge push towards getting kids into school and getting girls into school. But here's, a reality is that about 40-50% of our female doctors, they don't work or they don't practice on graduation. So we are losing women to areas which they have not necessarily always been trained for. So we must address these biases early on, I believe, and that will only come through, I think, a better understanding of the education system at a very early age. And also, I believe it's going to be a right that's going to be demanded by the younger generation coming forward.
Thank you so much, Maheen. And you very rightly pointed out that even when we're talking about climate change, we've really interacted with some of very vibrant and empowered young women in Pakistan as well at the forefront of that movement. And very, very young teenagers, like 15 years old, 13-year-old, who are well aware of that and are pushing through and demanding change. So you're right that there is a lot more awareness. However, there is also disparity. There are different classes, right? And different classes are impacted in a different way. So when we talk about disparity and women being 50% of the population, this is a very small chunk that is well aware and able to fight. So there's this notion of women who are in the leadership position to be able to create that space for more women who currently become their voice, actually, who don't have a voice, and create that push for these women to also engage in the workforce. So I would want to get your thoughts on that. And also, just being a woman in this industry in leadership position for a long time, what were some of the challenges or biases that you encountered?
Okay, so maybe I'll address the second part of your question first because that'll lead into the next part. So, in terms of the biases, um, I think the biggest one is always that whenever you are in the corporate sector and you're doing a role, there is always an assumption that you're doing it as a time pass, or that you're doing it just until you get married and have children, or you're doing it until you have a child and then you leave the business. So I think one of the key biases to break is that you're serious about your job and your profession and you want to carry it forward. And I think that's a tough one to break at every level. I mean, I have had statements in the past saying, "Oh, but do you really want a salary increase? You just, you will just spend it on clothes, or it's just for your own, it's for your own recreation." And I think that concept of being financially empowered, of being financially independent, that's something that you have to keep pushing again and again. Um, I think one of the things that you mentioned is that women leaders pave the way. So I think one of the key ways that we can pave the way, and something that I've already done many times in the past, is to empower and mentor those that are coming up below us. So let's face the reality that there are not enough senior women in Pakistan to pull everybody up. So you're going to have to make allies with the men. And I think every woman that you have on this panel in particular has had those allies and has had actually men supporting her throughout her career, and that's really important to um, understand how relevant that is in developing that network and that those allies. I think the other thing that we can do is, when we are hiring, it should be hired. We should go with a merit-based hiring process. And same applies to promotion, same applies to increments, same applies. So if as an organization you are shown to be blind towards gender, and you are then focused on rewarding the role and rewarding the performance, then automatically you will begin to see the best performers come up. And that, by and large, aside, I do not want to generally stereotype, but the women who are in the workforce, they are there because they want to be there, because they have a job to do and they like the economic empowerment it brings, and they tend to do their jobs fairly judiciously and well. So if we focus on a merit-based system of both hiring, interviewing, and promoting, I think then we will begin to see a lot more women trickle to the top. That's something that an organization can do. That's something that leadership can bring. But also from the supply side, we have to see women willing to step up and take on more difficult assignments or more challenging assignments. I think what I have seen in the past, a lot of women who like to focus on supporting areas such as HR or marketing, development, etc., because they believe that those areas are not sort of client focused, front focused. They don't have the pressure of developing revenue. But I think it's important to take on those roles as a woman. And be the front face and be the revenue generator in a company, because then you are, I believe, truly valued. So it's a give and take. And I think what I have at least seen in my experience in career is that men are very eager to jump at a promotion or an opportunity. On the flip side, what I see is women, sometimes they don't even have kids, but they're thinking, "Oh dear, I'm married. If I have children, how will I manage this role?" And my simple answer to that will be, well, you have to start and then you see how you manage it. Everything can happen if you have the willingness to make it happen. So with those thoughts, I mean, I think I'll stop here. But I think it's both a give and take on both sides. You will find bias. I think you kind of have to develop a thick skin and move ahead with whatever you want to achieve. And if that's being a homemaker and raising a family, those are absolutely 100% valuable things that society needs. But if you want to do a little bit more and have a career, then that power is exclusively in your hands, and then you try and work the system or make the system change to adapt to your needs as well.
Thank you so much, Maheen. And that is actually a perfect segue to call in our next speaker as well. And like you mentioned, choice. Women should have the choice to engage in work or not. And currently, that's where we have this discussion about equality versus equity. Like if you're talking about, there should be gender equity. We're not saying that if a man can pick up two bricks, women should be able to pick up two bricks as well. That's like exact equality. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the choice being there on the table so that any decision that is being made, we're able to contribute because it will impact us as well. And for that, like you mentioned, there is a need for male champions. Men and women are both in this together, and women empowerment, it is not just a myopic agenda that only women will benefit. The entire society benefits with well educated, empowered women. So I would like to call on our next speaker. And Maheen, we'll come back to you in the Q&A sessions because some of the points you raised, I have follow-up questions on those as well. So I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Amir Paracha. Thank you so much for joining us and daring to be the only man on this all-women panel. So thanks a lot. Brief intro. Amir Paracha is the chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Unilever Pakistan Limited. He joined the board on 1st February 2020. He joined Unilever Pakistan in 2000 and has held various senior management positions in Pakistan and MENA cluster over his 20 years with the company. Amir continues to actively experiment with disruptive business models and has championed inclusion across the Unilever ecosystem in Pakistan. Amir began his career at the Royal Dutch Shell Oil Company in July 1996 and has done his master's in business administration from the Institute of Business Administration. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Amir Paracha. And I'll quickly take on the discussion forward with you. And as we were just talking about male champions and the need to have male allies for women to push through, because even today men are the gatekeepers of power, of the power corridors, and there is support required from well-intentioned men to push for more gender parity. So I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that and how you think that women can get more involved, and also your journey in Unilever and in the corporate sphere at large as to how you've pushed for more inclusion, inclusivity, and reducing workplace harassment that most all of us women face, even in today's day and age. So over to you, Amir.
Thank you, Sahar, for the kind introduction and the invite. Well, I think so. What is very heartening to see that since Women's Day, there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of conversations happening on the subject, which is clearly, is showcasing that there's a lot of um, talk going around that how we can actually make our environment a lot more inclusive. Uh, you know, I would say I'm lucky to basically work for Unilever because in the last 4 years, out of four CEOs, Unilever happened to have two um, women CEOs. Starting with Musharraf, and then my predecessor, who was my boss as well, was Shazia Sayed. So Unilever happened to be an organization who always encouraged women, in the top leadership positions. And I remember Musharraf was made the chairman and CEO of Unilever back in 2002, and this was a time when it was very rare for women in the top leadership positions, and that's where the organizations have always walked the talk, and it really gave encouragement to a lot of other women to look up and give them that belief that they can also climb up the corporate ladder, and also to men who was working at the company, give that confidence and that belief that women can actually run big ships and big organizations like any other men can do. And I think so that's been happening for quite a while. I've been seeing it for the last 2 decades. So it's a journey one needs to go through. And initially, the organization was only talking about, gender balance, about diversity, and then started talking about inclusivity. And lately, this year theme of Unilever globally was equality is not equal, equity is. And that's a beautiful concept. And this concept is all about that one size does not fit all. And you require a very customized kind of policies for even for any person, for women as well, for women who are unmarried, for women who are married, for women who have married but have kids, or a woman who is single parenting. You can't have one policy for everyone, and same applies for men as well. So I think so. The equity means that you need a very customizable policy. Gone are those days when you used to have one policy that used to fit all. So if you really want to promote women in your organization and your culture, that you need to have a customizable policy. You need to believe that one size won't be fitting all, and you need to have a very customizable policy given the context of the woman coming to your organization. And I think so that's how you can increase the gender ratio, and you can actually make yourself a lot more inclusive. Now, coming to your question about how we can make women more involved, um, what I have experienced at Unilever, there are three things that are critical to making your workplace practically fairer. The first question one should be asking is your performance and growth criteria is fair, transparent, and bias proof. That's the first thing you should be looking at. The second thing you should be looking at is when you're recruiting for a role, do you have equal number of resumes for both men and women? Yeah, that's the second critical thing you need to ensure if you want to make your workplace, fairer. The third bit is uh, when you have women in the company, do you ensure that they receive equal networking, mentoring, sponsoring opportunities within the organization? And these are the three critical key questions one must be asking if they really believe in promoting gender diversity in this organization. And finally, coming to your point about violence and harassment, at the workplace, um, and it does exist, and it does not only exist in our country; it exists globally. So Pakistan is not any unique. It is rather a lot more prevalent in the western part of the economy. So we must not consider, given we are an emerging and developing country, it's more in our part of the world and less in the western part of the world. As a matter of fact, it's more in the western part of the world than in our part of the world. But having said that, in order to really basically stop it, and in order to monitor it, you got to have the right policies in the company. I'm proud to say that Unilever happened to the first country company in the country who have launched a proper domestic violence protection policy back in October 2020. It's been now 1.5 year, and this policy gives a protection when it comes to psychological support. It gives you legal counseling. It provides you accommodation as well if you are feeling any security threat, if you are facing any kind of a harassment or a domestic violence at your policy. So I think so. There are two bits which are important. One is you got to basically have the right policies in the organization. Number two, you are have the right tracking mechanism in the organization, and number three, you are really monitoring it and you're making it possible to practice in the organization effectively. So that's what my 2 cents on your question.
Thank you so much, Amir. And you've raised all very pertinent points. Um, One thing that I just wanted to maybe have a follow up point on that, and then I'll move on to my next question, was when you're talking about harassment. So there are different kinds of harassment. Yet, yes, you're right, sexual harassment may prevail in the Western world more. But I feel like there's also mental and verbal harassment. And that is a very subtle sense type of harassment that a lot of men and women in our work culture don't even acknowledge it as harassment. So, for example, in one of my jobs, if I was working for a boss who would just curse, it was a norm for them. So there were two ways. Either I would toughen up, thick skin, ignore it, because that's what all men were doing as well. And they're like, you're there, figure it out. Or there has to be some consequence, or the need from the organization level to call out bad behavior and to prevent it from happening. So yes, initially there will be the need for having a thick skin because we're very few. But at least for me personally, I feel later on that's where that ecosystem, the need and the understanding needs to develop, that women are comfortable and are able to push through different working environments. So just getting your thoughts on
Mhm.
the non, like other kinds of harassment
No, no.
as well, which are very, very prevalent in our work environments.
Absolutely, and I think, Seher, you have really touched upon a very, very, interesting topic. You're right. It's not only about a sexual harassment. There's, you can feel bullied, you can feel excluded, you can be mentally harassed, and there are multiple kind of harassment. Interestingly, being a man, I tell you one thing. One interesting part is many a time people don't even realize, particularly men, that they are harassing someone. Yeah, it does not even occur to them, but actually they are harassing. And for them, it does not appear to them. And uh, and I share something very interesting. We usually run our code policies around respect, dignity, and fair treatment in the organization. We keep carrying out conduct different sessions, but last year we basically did an enactment. So we basically called a few people from the theater. Yeah. And what we did, we asked them that why don't you basically do some enactments, because we keep on receiving complaints through our code line. And we knew few situations where when we went to reach out to a woman and to men, and we said, listen, there's been a court complaint against you, and the women have felt harassed. And practically, first of all, the person didn't even it didn't even occur to him that actually he was harassing, because he said, well, I never realized it that I was harassing someone, and I didn't mean it. And we said, well, you didn't mean it, but actually you ended up harassing. So we created a situation, and we made those people to enact, yeah, in the real life situation on a daily basis. Yeah. And we did basically, and we showcased at a company level. And I tell you, the kind of a positive response, yeah, we received through that enactment, and the way we ended up messaging, it was very, very powerful. And I think this is one other way, yeah, where organizations can actually get such enactment done through theatrics in the organization, to really send a message across everyone, that many a time you do not feel you're harassing, but actually you are. And these are the possible or potential situations that can be, yeah, that you may got too close to a woman, yeah, and you thought, well, I didn't realize you got too close to a woman. Or you practically may touched her, not meaning to really harass her, but actually she felt uncomfortable. So we created such kind of enactments, and that was very powerful in order to really display what our value systems are, and what they must not be doing if we really want to make women inclusive, and that they really want to promote women and gender diversity in the organization.
And that's a very good example that you've actually brought ahead. And being able to, you're right, like even through sense of humor, some of these things acted out actually have a stronger impact. And that's where actually you need male champions, because as women we go around saying the same thing, and it's kind of we're like a beaten record, right? Broken record, sorry. So we're just saying the same thing, and that's where you need allies who understand the challenges women face, and are standing with us as we go through the work environment. So thank you so much for your comments and for
Thank you.
answering these questions. I'll move on to the second speaker, and we'll come back in the Q&A. Thank you, Amir.
Sure. Thank you.
And we'd like to move forward to Mrs. Yasmin Ali, who doesn't need an introduction at all, but here goes. Miss Yasmin Lari is the first woman architect of Pakistan. I think we should let that sink first. After initial schooling at Queen Mary, sorry, just one second. Yeah, at Queen Mary's Adabistani Sufia and Connaught College, Lahore, Pakistan, she graduated from Oxford School of Architecture, UK in 1963 and was elected member of Royal Institute of British Architects in 1969. As president of Institute of Architects Pakistan and first chairperson of Pakistan Council of Architects and Town Planners, Lari was instrumental in bringing about recognition for the professions of architecture and town planning through PCAT TP Ordinance 1983. I'm sorry, I butchered that. In 2006, in recognition of her services to the architectural profession and heritage conservation, she was awarded Sitara Imtiaz, one of the highest civil awards by Government of Pakistan. She established Lari Associates Architects Urban Designers in 1964 and took on the challenges as an architect dealing with issues in an industrially less developed country. In 1980, Yasmin, along with her husband Sohail Zahilai, established Heritage Foundation as a family trust. Recipient of UN Recognition Award 2002 for promotion of culture and peace, Yasmin's profile has been included among 60 women from around the world who have contributed most towards objectives of UNESCO. So welcome, Mrs. Yasmin Lari, and thank you so much for your time and willing to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jharra. And I'm so sorry, when you get to my age and there's so much sort of backlog that is there that, I feel embarrassed that you have to say all those things. But Assalamu alaikum, and really, I'm just very happy to be here. And I have to say, Seher, कि आपने जो introduction दिया वो बहुत ही मेरे ख्याल में बहुत अच्छा था, लेकिन बहुत disturbing भी था. और ये अच्छी बात है क्योंकि हमें ये बातें सोचना होंगी. और आपने जो आज मुझे इसमें शामिल किया, so I got a peep into the corporate world, which, as you know, I'm totally unfamiliar with. So I'd just like to, I have a prepared statement. I thought there was a different format, but if you would, if you would forgive me, I will just read out and talk about some of the issues that are really closest to my heart. So, titled as I am, as architect for the poorest of the poor by Ancient University of Milan, called Politecnico di Milano, on the award of their honorary degree to a woman in over a century and a half. I'm honored to be included in this high-tech, and we have the guru, Jharra, sitting here, high-powered corporate powerhouse that all of you women, and one, of course, Mr. Amir, that represents the corporate sector, that is gathered here today. So I'm really totally out of all that world. Let me state at the outset that with the laudable contributions of the corporate sector and distribution of funds that national and international corporations generously provide through their well-structured CSR programs, I believe that we need to revisit the colonial mindset that promotes this particular kind of Western charity model, where the target group is considered a victim, always considered a victim, and those who live on the borders are given benevolent largesse as if they are helpless sufferers. I feel that somehow we need to bring about a change there. So I believe the time has come to begin to treat those who are marginalized, particularly women, as partners. Rather than feeling sorry for them, let's give them an equal kind of level of understanding. Since 2005 disastrous Pakistan earthquake, I have been privileged to get the opportunity to work with downtrodden communities, literally from north to south of Pakistan. For me, climate change has been a reality for several years past now, and the most disruptive force in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, rendering them climate migrants and leaving them shelterless and penniless after the annual flooding or earthquakes. Over the past years, the strange phenomenon that I witnessed has been the millions of dollars being pumped into emergency or rehabilitation work, and is being done even today, as we know, all of you are doing it, has hardly made a dent to the fate of the poor in my country, because I see that poverty rising all the time. And I have seen that women and children are the worst sufferers, and hardly any attention is paid to them. There's little emphasis on disaster preparedness or training women, to take the lead in climate resilient strategies, whether the urban or rural areas. I mean, here you have urban flooding and nobody knows what to do. You have urban heat islands and nobody is doing much about it. And because women are not in the forefront, they are not even asked to take a part in this, to try to ameliorate the conditions. So just as alternative energy has still not found a firm footing, and we are talking of energy and women, my zero carbon housing, drawn from heritage, vernacular techniques, and ancient wisdoms, built with locally sourced bamboo, lime, and earth, which is the most economical in the world today, in Pakistan, it is still looked at with suspicion. Why bamboo? Why earth? Why not something high tech? So, and this is after having built 50,000 housing units and 70,000 earthen Pakistan Chula stoves that won the World Habitat Award. This is the state that I am in right now. The present government's much touted housing scheme for 5 million houses has no intention to focus on women or the poor at all. Because while a minimum of 300,000 rupees will be available to me as a subsidy if I was to build a house worth for 1.6 million, none of you will be building, of course, that cheaper house, but maybe some do. And if I wanted to get a loan of rupees 50,000 for my poor women, no bank worth its salt will consider providing it. It's been going on for a long time. They will give me 50 lakhs, a crore, 2 crores if I want, but nothing for 50,000 rupees for the poor woman who wants to build a house. But I have to say, with the exception of Bank of Punjab and its dynamic chief executive Zafar Masood, who have only recently agreed to provide rupees 50,000 loan to 100 women through 4 Ma Madad committees of 25 women each in Mirpur Khas, which will enable self-building of one-room shelters and shared eco-toilets based on my video tutorials that are being followed on cell phones by downloading them from the YouTube. The lesson I've learned is that in countries such as ours, with high levels of corruption and poor governance, we need to make our community strong by partnering with women and training them through skills and expertise to undertake rights-based development for them to achieve at least a reasonable quality of life. I know today we can reach the remotest corner using technology, and that's why we need to really be looking at it very, very seriously. So, living in a city like Karachi, which exudes nothing but hostility and barbaric indifference towards women and children, if a few privileged women among ourselves are able to break the glass ceiling, in my view, it is insufficient to provide the panacea we are seeking for the majority of women. In my work, my target are women who are part of 80% of Pakistan's population that I define as belonging to the barefoot ecosystem. These are the poorest, the poor people who are in majority. An ecosystem of these poor people constituting the poorest sections of society who have never been given sufficient credence nor sufficient support. I will only take 10 minutes. I signed myself, so please just bear with me. In my
Please go
work
ahead.
over the last, my work over the last decade and a half, I know these are the sections, and particularly the female population, that needs only slightest of support to be able to rise above adversity and become self-reliant and empowered. This is what we need to do. Today, as I'm focusing on the historic core of Karachi, and you probably have not even been there, that suffers from the worst of urban blights, that is called the Market Quarter, Machi Miani, and all the rest of it, and the Karadar, I know that forging partnerships with different stakeholders, a sense of ownership can be brought to a city that we all know is considered an orphan. Nobody thinks Karachi deserves it, and nobody really cares what happens to the city. I would like to acknowledge, I'm not saying nobody, but yes, few people do. I would like to acknowledge here the contribution of KE and the special interests of Monis Alvi, who have played a significant role in removing unsightly cables and huge, ugly contraptions, helping to reveal some of the most beautiful heritage facades in the city in what has become commonly known as the Zero Carbon Street. I don't know how many of you have ventured there. Please go sometime when you have the time, and a Sunday when you can park your car in comfort. It's called the Densely Hall Walking Street, Rahguzar Walking Street. I recently created eco enclave that I designed to mitigate the impact of climate change by using many principles of eco urbanism, no to cement and steel, and use of ancient craft of permeable terracotta by Makli women who were once beggars, and a number of Miyawaki style forests which have cleansed the air of pollution, many of them planted by my friends in the Rotary. And I know that Shahzad Abdullah is here, who's been an amazing president for the newly found chapter of Rotary, where there is no urban flooding and no urban heat islands. If you go there, you will find how the air is so changed and so refreshing. This is an inclusive environment where women and children are welcomed and where there is no distinction of rank, gender, or color. The greatest gift that I have been able to achieve or receive through provision of social and cultural impact funding to the tune of 15 million rupees invested by Heritage Foundation is the stake that has been developed, the stake that is developing and has developed among the shop owners. They are our partners, just as KE and other service providers are, with the most laudable role played by administration led by the dynamic Deputy Commissioner Irshad Ali Sodar. He has been outstanding in the help that he has given. The shop owners are now proud of their street and have joined hands in maintaining cleanliness and upkeep of trees that has provided a biodiversity as we see birds chirping and butterflies floating. An unheard of phenomenon in a city which all those with power and influence are bent upon converting into a concrete jungle of multi-story towers. It is the same entirely indifferent shop owners who were once oblivious of the beauty of heritage buildings that are today they had mutilated them. I can tell you, you can just go and have a look what's been done to our heritage, ancient heritage that we've had, which is our pride. And they are now my partners, investing their funds along with me in restoring the beautiful facades of historic architecture that endows Karachi with its unique characteristics, as you know, its identity and its pride. If that's gone, there'll be nothing much left in the city that we can be proud of. For the implementation of the project, we have not taken or received any funding from corporate sector or the political government, except of course service providers who have given improved services. And yet it is a street that is improving by the day, that is visited by people living in the far-flung areas of Karachi, as well as tourists from upcountry and abroad, which is an urban, it's like an urban oasis in the midst of a highly degraded part of the city that we can all be proud of as Karachiites, because Karachi can become like this all the way, that it'll be welcoming women to be a part of it. It is my belief that the city is ripe for providing ownership in segments through a three-way partnership. First, social, cultural, environmental impact investment, not grant, investment through corporate sector or civil society or the community. Secondly, facilitation by administration and service providers. And thirdly, ownership of stakeholders composed of surrounding communities. We have to join hands together if we want to really make it into a livable place. Such a partnership can provide reasonable returns to funders, at the same time convert Karachi's brutal environment into humanistic enclaves which promotes the well-being of all sections, above all women and children. There's nothing for them when you go to these areas. If you ever muster courage enough to walk through the streets of maze of the streets in the old town, you will find not a single woman, as was the case in my present Echo Enclave as well. Not a single woman dares to walk down there. The streets are the reflection of corrupt practices of the powers that be, who have allowed destruction of the original 2 to 3 story heritage buildings, beautiful ones, to be replaced by multi-stories along narrow streets, which allow no sunlight to penetrate, and entirely unhealthy environments with enclosed pavements and a jumble of cables and wires. And KE, please listen, it's all, the wires are everywhere, that are not only dangerous, but are a collection of filth and absolute visual pollution. It is women and children who are now inhabiting those unhealthy constructions. And then we wonder why COVID-19 was so deadly for us. I mean, you go and see how it could have happened. Also, the city of Karachi, even though an orphan, is ready to start developing a sense of ownership in segments, though through partnerships as we have been able to develop at Densohol Raguzar Walking Street. I would urge this August gathering, and you're all very powerful people sitting here, to consider providing impact investment, which would bring a reasonable return, at the same time bring about large-scale benefits for the community. Although I've not sought a return on the investment made by the Heritage Foundation, but I know now that people would be willing to pay back when they see their businesses flourish. I believe the time is ripe for this sustainable model of partnership, driven by socially, culturally, and environmentally driven investment, combined with maybe perhaps your CSR, whatever investment as well, and funding, one that could lead the large-scale transformation. We need it for everybody, and especially for women and children. So the strategy could transform the present stagnant humanitarian charity culture, and all of you indulge in that based on colonial mindset. So let's give it up and let's go ahead and do some impact investment, which will transform the whole society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lai. Thank you so much for talking about the great work that you're doing, and also providing solutions, also telling all of us and our panelists as well how the private sector and significant organizations can contribute. Like you said, environment degradation and climate change impacts women and children the worst. And you also mentioned that they're not included in the discussion because they were never part of it, and just very little training, and women come across as the most resilient and contributing at equal footing. So thank you so much for raising all those points. And we will get into a panel discussion in the second half of this panel. And in the interest of time, I'd move forward and call our second speaker, Ms. Jharra, to on stage virtually. And I'll start with a brief introduction, and then we can have a discussion. So Ms. Jharra is the founder and CEO of Catalyst Lab, which is a startup accelerator, innovation hub, and women leadership fellows program. She's the former president of the Pakistan Software Houses Association for IT and ITES, PASHA, where she spearheaded efforts for over 20 years and was responsible for developing the PASHA brand and creating linkages. She is a motivator, an entrepreneur, a social activist, and a strong propagator of extending the power and use of information and communication technologies beyond pure traditional business to empower and enable communities. Currently, Jharra serves as a member of the PM's Task Force for IT and Telecom, member of the APAC Content Advisory Board for TikTok, and is on the advisory boards of Punjab IT Board and Sindh IT Board. In January 2015, Jharra set up the Nest.io, a technology incubator, accelerator, and innovation community hub in Karachi with the support of Google for entrepreneurs to help provide a platform for aspiring technology business in the buzzing city of Karachi. And under her leadership, she was able to create the flagship innovation entrepreneurship conference, 0 to 1 Disrupt, which over the period of 4 years became the go-to premier event that brought together startups, innovator professions, and students on the platform to engage from along the world as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jharra, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sahar, for that generous introduction.
No, I skipped quite a lot, so sorry if I didn't do justice.
Okay, no worries.
So,
as Mrs. Lari said, when you have spent so many years working, the bio tends to get longer and longer, and there's no way that you can expect anyone to cover it.
no, but it just also highlights the amount of accomplishments and the hard work that you've put in over the years.
Thank
So
you.
no shying away from that at all. So just taking the discussion forward, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about the gender divide. So the digital divide, which is still a gendered one, right? And how to ensure participation of women in STEM fields. We know.
Okay. Yeah,
Please go
sorry.
ahead. Please go ahead, and I'll have a question afterwards.
So it's not, the digital divide is not just a gender divide, it's also a divide across the country. So mostly digital is limited to some of the largest cities and does not extend to a lot of Pakistan. But yes, gender is part of it, and we need to focus on each of these areas separately. And since we are breaking the bias and talking about women in this webinar, I will talk about how we can encourage more women to enter the tech workforce. So the problems are very, very easy to solve. And I think partly COVID has solved them for us to some limited degree. I think before COVID happened, remote work was not something that many companies looked at. They would shy away from it because they said, oh, we don't know whether the teams are working from home. We don't know how we can ensure collaboration. We don't know how we can carry on training and this and that. But now, because of COVID and the use of digital, people have conducted trainings online through Zoom or StreamYard or many of these channels. Many of the teams have worked using collaborative tools like Slack and Zoom. Again, we've had meetings, we've had webinars, we have had partner meetings. We've even collaborated with people for 2 years without ever having met them. So that's sort of part of the problem. And so then companies started to think about the fact that, look, if people can work from home, then why not women? And so more women became part of the technology industry. And the technology industry, fortunately for us, has grown due to COVID, and also apart from COVID as well. We've had a lot of business coming in from outside as well as from the local market. So they have needed additional resources. And so, in addition to men that they hired, they have also hired women. Now, it's not as if there were never any women in the tech industry. There were always been about 11 to 12%. And now maybe that has increased to about 15% in Pakistan. And that's not very different from the world stats. I think globally there are about 20% women, perhaps, in the tech field. So we aren't doing that badly, but that doesn't mean that we should not try to do better. Organizations have found that when they employ women, the kind of work that women produce is far superior, that women are more committed. They may come into the office maybe a few hours a week, but then when they go home, settle in their kids or their families or their parents or whatever it is that they are responsible for, they then continue to work and make sure that the work is finished and is in very good order. The quality never suffers. So I think that has enabled a lot of women to be accepted a lot more into the tech field. Although there were always women, they were always, there weren't very much as far as the numbers are concerned. And they also had trouble, transportation problems as far as working during the night is concerned. Those were areas that did concern women due to our cultural barriers, and also because, safety, that's something we all have to think about. So that has partly been solved by COVID and the acceptance of remote work. You're on mute, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute.
That happens to all of us.
Yeah. 2 years into this, we're still figuring out mute and unmute. So thank you so much for highlighting the gap, but also that we're not far behind from the global average, but there is a lot of potential to improve. And yes, you're right. COVID has been, especially for the tech world, a blessing in disguise, because it has really brought the idea of virtual work, like working virtually and remotely, to reality, which a lot of big companies were only flirting with previously. So you're perfectly right on that. So just another very brief question, and coming from someone who's been working in this area and you've been advising and supporting new startups as well. Do you see women, like what percentage or average do you see women being young entrepreneurs? What advice would you like to give women who are trying to or exploring different fields to create that push for STEM fields? And also, I would briefly like to touch on organization like Girls Who Code, which have branches in different parts of the world and also in India. And do you think we can develop an environment in Pakistan where we can push for such organizations in Pakistan as well?
So, okay, let me try and remember all the three questions that you put into one. So the first one was, how do we get more women to become entrepreneurs, or how many young women are entrepreneurs, right? Yes, there are increasing number of women entrepreneurs who are starting businesses, continuing businesses, and growing businesses. And a lot of people are surprised at that. I am not. So women don't just start a business because they think they want to start a business. They start businesses because they see a need and they want to fill that need. Many of them are impact-driven businesses, but that does not mean that they are not businesses. So they do understand that they need to have an impactful business that solves a problem, but it needs to be self-sustaining and it needs to be revenue-driven so that they can continue that business over time. So that has taken time for investors to understand. Because originally they said, oh, women just go emotional, they're emotional, so they start a business because they feel strongly about something, and then it's not a business anymore because they feel that they've created an impact and that's that, and they don't look at financial management, don't look at the bottom line. Not true. Women do look at the bottom line. They also look at where they're spending the money. They don't necessarily spend the money on lavish offices and, bean bags and what have you, that I'm also quite guilty of doing. But, you need to watch where you're spending the money and if you have enough money to do all that, right? And you have to look at it long term. So I think women do that. The second thing is women have started businesses, look, in which verticals? Education, healthcare. Also, I was talking to a young woman this morning, livestock, agri-tech. So there are many areas that women have entered that you would not have expected women to be. In fintech, for instance, a lot of people are surprised. Why? You have Maheen Rahman and people like that who've been part of finance for a long, long time. So I don't know why they did not expect women to be successful starting a fintech business. There are many areas. There's a young woman who started a business where she thinks that once you buy an expensive gown, you don't use it a second time at a wedding or an event, but you can rent it out, and you can then get it clean, rent it out, get it back, maybe sell it. And it's a company called Closet, and that's what they've been doing. Then there are women who started communities. So women like Nadia Ganji, who started SheOps and now has FenPro, she has started a community of women that are now entrepreneurs and that help each other. And then you have Faiza Yusuf, who's started Women in Tech, which is a great platform where women who are part of technology get together, share opportunities, learn from each other, and all of that. So I think it's you need to look beyond what you can see right ahead of you and see what's going on. There are a lot of women doing a lot of important work, and there are women who do that but don't talk about it as much, don't blow their own trumpet. And it's time we did that for them. And I think that's part of my mission now at Catalyst Labs, is to not only help women become business leaders, become CEOs. There are many of them now at mid-management who are not becoming leaders. So trying to figure out why that is, and then helping them do that, and also talking about the ones who are out there, who built businesses, who continue to create employment and create opportunities for others. And now I've forgotten the other two questions you had. Got caught up in this one.
No, thank you so much. And I think you kind of addressed the others. And when we move ahead in the Q&A, I will come back to you. So thank you so much for highlighting all the interesting work that's happening. And we'll quickly move on to our next speaker, last but not the least, Ms. Sadia Dada. And then we'll have an interactive Q&A discussion. So a brief intro of Ms. Sadia. Ms. Sadia Dada's experience spans communications, brand building, sustainability management, as well as media and reputation management. She previously served at KE as Director Communications and Chief of Staff and led the transformation of the communications function, strengthened KE's digital footprint, and spearheaded several customer centricity initiatives. Following a brief stint with Philip Morris Pakistan as Director Communications, Ms. Dada returned to KE earlier this year and currently leads the marketing, communications, CSR, and customer experience functions. An alumnus of the Lahore University of Management Sciences, she brings multi-sectoral experience from her past affiliations, including Unilever Pakistan, Nestle Pakistan, and Mobilink. Committed to an inclusive society, Ms. Dada is part of now PDP's Board of Advisors and founder of Women in Numbers, an online networking community exclusively for working women. So welcome, Sadia.
Thank you. That was very verbose.
No, but that's a great introduction. You've done a lot, so it was important to highlight that. So, as someone who's worked in the energy sector through KE and in at high senior positions in communications as well, I would like to get your opinion on what do you think is one of the biggest challenge that women in the energy industry face today, and also about the work you are doing at KE for improving inclusion of women in the organization, but the energy sector at large as well. So over to you, Sadia.
Thank you, sir. Again, going last has a lot of benefits. A lot of has already been said. Kind of puts pressure on you on what you can. So thank you for phrasing that question. I'm also very grateful to all the lovely panelists and speakers who went before me. So great. Thank you to Maheen, Amir, Yasmin ji, and Jahan for giving me such wonderful nuggets. Particularly, Yasmin ji, thank you. I will send across your words of appreciation to Munis. It will make his day for sure. It always does when it comes from somebody like you. On the question that Seher asked, I think energy sector, I'll just talk a little bit about the general challenges, and I know a lot has been said. I would divide them into two categories. One are the challenges that women face while, sort of what I would call in marketing speak barriers to entry. And those are very, if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those are the baseline challenges. Straight up safety, it's a concern not just for women, but also men. It's also not just a concern for working women. We know for a fact that safety is also a concern in home. I want to commend Amir for mentioning gender-based violence and the domestic violence policy that Unilever has. So even in home, safety is a concern, which basically means that we should not pivot safety as a barrier to entry for women, and that's something I'll come back and circle back to later. The second is mobility. In Pakistan, again, it's not a gender specific issue. Even जो आपके रोजमर्रा की transportation, because we don't have a lot of public transportation. If it's there, it's not routine. It's disrupted. It's not streamlined. So mobility is generally a problem, but particularly for women, if they are in roles after dark, for example, or things that are either in remote places where there is no ready transport available, it can be a bit of a challenge opting for roles which require you to commute longer distances. The third is access or opportunity, which is again something that we can handle via policy. If you make it mandatory to have 50% male and 50% female resumes, if you know how to reach a female audiences, and I'm going to circle back to this one later as well, I think there needs to be a lot of change in the way we recruit in this day and age, because the biggest barrier, once you cross that mental barrier, you make sure that you're safe, you have mobility, but if you do not have opportunity or access to it, you're not aware of openings or nobody's reached out to you, then that's a problem. And then, of course, when you join the workforce, you have the biggest, I believe, barrier is, of course, progress and growth. And also the starting point, it's about equal pay. I want to put in a stat here. I generally don't like doing that, but this one was too big to skip. So the World Bank has just recently come out with a report on women, business and law 2022, and it sort of is put an estimate to the gap. If you look at the gap between men's and women's expected lifetime earnings, it currently stands at $172 trillion. That's twice the amount. If I took the GDP of all countries and I combine them, that's twice global GDP. That's the gap that we have between men and women's lifetime earnings. If you start low, you will always stay at the bottom of the earning curve. And again, in the corporate sector, the growth is percentage based, right? So if you're starting at a low pace, the percentage growth, even if it's the same as your male colleagues, it will always be lower at absolute terms. And over time, that gap just sort of accelerates. So these are the things that really are an issue. When I talk specifically about the energy sector, for some reason, the sector is sort of given up on including women, because there's so many things that you will hear when you're talking to your recruiters or your industry peers. Oh, we don't find enough female candidates, there aren't enough women. Yes, there are graduate female engineers, but they choose not to work because they choose family over this. Oh, we looked, nobody applied. There really aren't enough qualified, competent women. It's a tough world. It's field work. They can't do it. Really, you think this is something? And these are the things that it's right here. There's a lot of heavy lifting. The work-life balance isn't that great. I think all of these are really sort of these questions that we have created. We don't have to put ourselves out there. The beauty of the energy sector is we're so big. I mean, you pick up any company, you will not find any company which is less than 5,000 people. But if you start slicing and dicing on the gender part of it, even for K Electric, for example, we've got only 4% women are in our management roles. 10,000 employees, if we start bringing the numbers in absolute terms, we can still make a huge difference. On the energy sector side, again, the biggest challenge for women is it's so male dominated. I'll give you my example. When I joined K Electric in 2016, and I came from, fortunately, from a company where I think 60% of the leadership was women. I came to a company where, if you look at the top 30 at that time, so it was the top 30 or 40, and I was the only female, all male dominated. I was actually known as a diversity hire. I embraced very well that tag, and I said, you know what, I'm going to change it. Today, I'm really happy to share we've got 6 female directors. We've got 2 CXOs. So I am part of the C-suite, and my colleague Naz, she is wonderful. She led strategy and IT at K Electric. We now have women on the board, which is again a big step for an energy sector company. And not only that, when we looked at the whole landscape, and I want to sort of give a shout out to all these organizations who put in diversity related awards. I think it's a fantastic way to push companies to aim higher. So if you look at PBC, if you look at OICCI, um, they have these awards, even the top employer of choice. Now, diversity has become sort of a measure which makes you enter into this elite club of organizations that are doing well. And when we look at the numbers, we felt, no matter how many women I put in management positions, I will never add up. And this is where the numbers come in. And I want to talk about how the energy sector can really, really make a difference if we start bringing women into the field roles. Requires a little bit of push, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of innovation, a little bit of trust. But what we've been able to do at K Electric in the last 2 years is that we've been able to put women in field roles which were historically and nationwide entirely male dominated. It's not that only men can do this role. It just so happens that only men were doing this role. And nobody really said, you know what, let's put a female there and see how it works. It wasn't easy. Again, all the perceived barriers to entry that I talked about, and I use the word perceived very cautiously. The perceived barriers, fieldwork, will they be safe? How will they manage? For example, meter reading. Meters are higher up on the wall. But what we did was we trusted the process. We said, let these women come in and decide. And this sort of goes back to the conversation that Seher, you were talking about, there being an ecosystem. Yes, as leaders, we need to put an ecosystem in place. But at the same time, we need to also let the system evolve. It's that principle of participative development, I would say. And when these women came, when we started with 3 in the field, we're up to 27 female meter readers now. We've got 5 grid service operators. And then we launched the Women Safety Ambassadors in the field. They're known as the Roshni Bajis. It's now an award-winning global program. We started with 40, and they're now, mashallah, up to 100. And they tell their story most beautifully in their own words. They've given us a lot of strength, and they've also sort of become very well entrenched into the power sector ecosystem. Again, I go back to the fact that if you are willing and if you're open to change and challenging the status quo, again, it's not that the sector is dominated by men, it's just that nobody's really started putting women in these roles, that the change hasn't taken place. But it's been very positive so far, the reception, the way that the industry has responded, the way that the regulator has responded and come forward and endorsed this initiative. It's very heartwarming that these things can happen if you really put your mind to it.
Thank you so much, Sadia, for highlighting all the work that you've done, especially in K Electric. Because I'm an ex-KU employee as well, so I was in KU when we had 0 CXOs. So super happy to see 2 on the table and 6 female directors as well. So taking the discussion forward, a quick follow-up question, and then I'll maybe we can have all the other panelists on the virtual stage as well, and we can roll on to a Q&A session. But just a small question, Sadia, would be, how do you think we can move the needle? Because becoming a role model for Pakistan for women economic empowerment is way, way far ahead. But any two steps or any immediate steps you think we can take to move the needle on empowering women economically, so giving them more economic participation and opportunities?
So I think the first one is obviously access, equal, equitable access and choice. Women should have that freedom of choice, on what roles they want to work in, what organizations that they want to join, and whether or not they want to do it. I mean, there should be no judgment whatsoever, but either which way you choose to go. The second one is that, what we probably need is a bit of a hamburger approach. So while we're making sure that the women at the top, and this is something that Maheen talked about, when you have women in leadership, then it's our role to lift the bottom up. And then what we need is a lot of numbers and feet on the street, essentially. Now, for example, if I talk about mobility being one of the biggest challenges for more and more women to join the workforce, put women in charge of mobility. When you get off the airport in Kuala Lumpur, for example, you will see that the entire transportation in and out of the airport, the public transportation system, is predominantly run by women. So women are not feeling safe being on the street. We need to put more and more women in the roles that are custodians of safety. I think we're having a paradigm shift there. We've got female Kareem captains, we've got female police officers, we've got women in the army. Alhamdulillah, we now have a judge in the Supreme Court, first female. So things are changing. But all these perceived barriers that I talked about, mobility, safety, and access, I think when we start putting and plugging women into these roles, the ecosystem will automatically become conducive to have more and more women in. So a hamburger approach is what I'd recommend.
Thank you so much, Sadia. And I will pose the similar question to you as well, Maheen. But and also picking up on one thing that you mentioned earlier is so having the merit-based approach and merit-based hiring. So yes, giving women opportunity, but being very merit-based. But at the same time, when we're talking about that lack of access to education, that women are not at par with men from day one. So then when you're talking about the leadership or hiring later on, there's already a disadvantage. So how do you think we tackle that?
Right. Thank you, Seher. I think let's be clear first that segment this out between those that have the access to education and who lose, who go through the college life cycle, etc., and those that don't even have that access to primary education. So let's talk first about those that have that access, that do go through colleges. It is, a small segment of society. But I think it's important to make sure that that segment also transitions into workspaces effectively, right? So what happens is, what we see very often in the corporate sector is that we see a lot of women, young women, coming in on early stage entry level roles, but then we tend to lose them in middle management areas. And I think what you will find is the reason that you see less women going up towards middle management is just simply because that is usually the time that they are getting married or having a family or raising children. And those are important life cycle goals and objectives. I think what we have to normalize is that CV gaps should not be looked upon negatively. If someone has taken 2, 3, 4 years out, it is not at the end of the world, and it doesn't mean that they are any less than a man for that job. In fact, if they have been involved in running a house or raising children, those in itself are organizational skills that can be applied to the corporate sector as well. So let's normalize CV gaps and understand that they may occur for very natural and normal reasons. I think the second point to raise also is, let's reward the roles and not the individual, right? So if you are hiring someone for a role that relates to communications, for example, then that job description is usually previously defined. The roles, responsibilities are clear. The compensation structure should be clear as well. So if you are going to place someone in that role, then reward them for that role, not that person or what they earned previously or what they did previously. If you have selected someone, then reward what they should be making in that role, and reduce that pay gap that is very, very common in organizations, and move towards pay equity for women as well. Because one reason women don't choose to come back into the workforce after they have had children is simply because they are undervalued for those roles, even though they are doing the same kind of work that role, or requires. I think finally we talk about merit-based assessments. I think those have to be transparent. They have to be clear. Goals and objectives need to be defined. And once you have a clear KPI metric, it's very easy and transparent for anyone, male or female, to assess how they did. And I think more and more we have to see that kind of governance come out in even small and medium scale enterprises, not just the large ones. I think as a final point, this has been mentioned before, work life balance is for everyone. It's not just for women. I think the number of times that I've been asked, how do you manage work and personal life? I say the same way the men do, honestly. And we need to stop stereotyping that it's only women that need to manage work life. It needs to happen across the board. Working hours are 9 to 6 for everyone, not just for the women. And frankly speaking, in this day and age when work from home is available, when COVID has changed the norms of a workspace, I think we should not even be asking that question, frankly. So, this is for the minority that go through school education, college education, and end up in the workforce. These are kind of the areas that we can address to keep them engaged and keep them interested. I think for the vast majority, as you pointed out, even getting into primary school is an issue. But taking a child from primary education all the way to secondary and then tertiary is, it's 13 to 14 year process. So that's a long cycle. And just by focusing on the primary school side, we're kind of ignoring all the young women who are there in the informal labor force today and not being recognized. So there, I think skills-based training, vocational training, digital literacy, I think is something that can really be ramped up very quickly, particularly when we look at how women in marginalized communities or low-income communities can actually work to create a home-based business online via Facebook or Instagram. And now there are the financial payment mechanisms to enable cash transfers that make it easy for them to transact and be part of the formal economy. So these are all areas to be worked on. I think it is truly the responsibility of government, primarily to ensure that the back-end plumbing on such things is available, but also the private sector in their outreach programs. They call it CSR, but I think it's much more than CSR. It has to really extend deeper into the communities where companies and factories and so on and so forth are set up, and see how that community can be engaged to provide those vocational and skills training. And that really, will kind of summarize how we can kind of engage both the formal and educated workforce, as well as, I would say, the low-income communities as well.
Ji, please. Ms. Tari, please go ahead.
Very interesting conversation, and it's just really, I've not thought about these issues, so it's good to know all about this. But my problem is slightly different. I think women have a lot of skills with the people that I work. They are totally non-literate, but they excel in so many things, which has come to them through childhood. They've learned how to handle it, like needlework. So we are trying to relate what they can do and what can be used in building construction, for instance. For example, my women make this fantastic chula, which is now absolutely known all over the world because of their work, which is that because they decorate it beautifully. They've been using mud and also atta for the longest time. They know exactly how to mold it, how to make beautiful designs out of it, because that's come to them from their mother and so on. So it's all inbuilt. This is the creativity that they have within themselves. And there's no way, apart from what I'm trying to do now, to try and harness those particular skills and see how they can become more productive. Because everybody wants to have a better quality of life, but they have no chance of going to a school. So many of these girls will never go to school because the schools just are not non-existent there. And there's no way the technology, and I've been asking, actually wanting Jharra to find a solution for me where we can, through technology, we could teach people, and so that they can learn, because they have such a hankering for learning. So I think, with I agree the CSR program has done a lot of good, but I think it's got to become a little bit more attuned to what people's needs are. There's something called the unmet need of people, and somehow if we can start relating to them, that would make a huge amount of difference. So, and what Mahin said was right, because I mean, there are things that can be done through CSR, and I agree that could be, but then you got to go into training and not into just giving out like a like a largesse. And if it can go into training, then certainly that's something that'll be very valuable. I was in London recently giving a lecture at the RIBA, and this is the question I was asked: if we don't give donations to your countries, then what do? We have these charity organizations. So I said, please get them to go and teach our people things to do, not give money to countries that are entirely corrupt in any case, where the poor never get it. So I really would like for all of you to think about this, because you can make a huge difference in these areas. Absolutely huge. Sorry, I hope that.
No. Thank you so much for raising all the valid points. And you're right, in terms of working with the grassroots, you have a very important perspective. And it's important for all the companies to understand. And I think in today's day and age, gender parity is beyond just a CSR issue. And that's the whole idea. It's not to trying to meet percentages. It's like, okay, X% of our population has to be women, and you throw women at the problem. And that's, I think this might be a personal belief, but when I talk about ecosystem, and as Sadia also mentioned, it's a chicken and egg kind of problem, or a hamburger, the way you called it. Both things have to go side by side. So yes, you throw women, as in you increase women, but you need to make sure, for example, that there are women washrooms in that environment. Because in today's day and age as well, a lot of our women working on the field face such basic issue as access to having a female bathroom. And
just any toilet, yeah.
Exactly. And even in the corporate sector, Mustari, even in the corporate sector, working in outskirts of Karachi, you will have organizations where there are only 2 women, and apparently doesn't justify having a separate washroom for women because there were 30 men and 2 women. So I'm just saying, yes, you will increase those 2 to 10, so the need will be created, but just the basic understanding and basic humanity, that just increasing the number of women should not be the push. The push should be the need for creating that space for women who are standing at par. So yeah, exactly, reducing the gap. So I will be quiet because I get over passionate about this, but I'll open it up for you, Jharra, and just want to pick up on Mahin also said, and what Ms. Ari also was talking about, the skill set, how to enhance the skill set, and maybe use more digital literacy to support women going forward.
So I think everybody has seen the need for that, and it is happening more and more. The thing to do is, I think one of the problems also is to have outreach to women so that they know that these opportunities are available to them and that they can take advantage of it. Some women actually keep themselves from entering a digital field because they've been told all along that tech is not for you, or that you cannot understand or use technology for your benefit because it's not a woman thing to do, which is just rubbish. Because now no business, no industry can operate without the use of digital, without the use of technology. And most young women can be trained, just like most young men can be trained to use technology well. In fact, they train us rather than the other way around, because they take to it so intuitively that for them it is something that they were born with, especially if they have access to a mobile phone. But as Mr. Lari said, not everybody has access to a mobile phone, and that's something we need to change. Again, this morning I was speaking with someone, and they said it's not just the mobile phone, it's also connectivity. We are told that there is connectivity across the country, but this young lady told me that that's not true. There is not sufficient connectivity available in even bigger cities within Sindh. In Jamshoro, for instance, there are certain parts where you have connectivity and certain parts where you don't. So, how do they access any online learning that is available if they don't have access to Wi Fi, if they don't have access to the kind of bandwidth that is required in order to attend, say, video lessons? Because it's not just text we are talking about. So, offering that training is one thing, but making sure that that training is accessible by the people that you are developing it for is also something that we have to keep in mind. So, our focus should not be, as I said earlier, should not just be the people in the urban centers, but also people across the divide. So, across Pakistan, in smaller cities, in towns, and you will find that they pick up on it very quickly as long as they know that it's going to benefit them and their children and that it's going to enable them to do the things that they can without being dependent on someone else, you'll find that it just happens because they're willing to put in the effort, they're willing to open up their minds. Why do we think that people who are not in the big three cities have less intelligence? Many of them have more intelligence than we do. It's just that they haven't had the opportunities that we have had. And that's something we must make sure happens if we want the country to develop. It cannot be limited to 3, 4, 5 cities. It needs to be across Pakistan. And I think that's something that all of us need to work on. It's not something I alone can do, or you alone can do, or Sadia or Maheen or Mrs. Lari or Amir can do. I know everybody's trying, but we need to make sure that this group of people expands and that there are more people entering this space where they are enabling others. And I think that's beginning to happen because young people are doing that. They understand the need and they are making sure that they're developing technology, they're developing platforms where many others like themselves can be engaged, and many who are not like them but can become much more enabled through the use of technology are able to do that. So it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. But a lot of young people do see the need and are providing the platforms that are required to fulfill that need. But we still have to make sure everybody has access to a mobile phone. And sometimes it's cultural. In many cities and villages, women are not allowed to have a mobile phone. So we need to address that cultural barrier as well, because unless that happens, we need to make sure that men see that if they have a mobile phone, they can make money, and that money can be used towards the household, can be used for much of the much of the stuff that they consume that they are not able to earn for. So it's a lot of there is a lot of problems that need to be tackled in order to make this technology available to everyone.
Thank you so much, Jharra. And I will come to you, Amir, now, as you rightly mentioned that men need to see that when women use, for example, technology, it can add to the household. And in all of this discussion, in breaking bias, there are a lot of preconceived notions about what women can, should, or could do. And a lot of that obviously comes with men as being our counterparts, as protectors in a lot of rural environment. The husband's supposed to be the protector or the bearer of bringing in income as well. So, Amir, my question to you would be, how do you think men can be genuine allies in terms of ensuring that women are able to move ahead, providing the support needed, but also stepping aside and letting them grow where they can? And I know this is a very broad question, a little philosophical as well, but just want to get your thoughts.
Let me share a very interesting statistic with you before I answer your question. So, globally, over 2.7 billion women are legally restricted from having the same choice of job as men do. Um, they've carried out an assessment of 189 economies in 2018, and of 100 out of that, 104 economies still have the laws preventing women from working in specific jobs. 59 countries have no laws on sexual harassment in the workplace. And in around 20 countries, husband can legally prevent their wives from working. Now, I think that that's a much bigger problem where the government needs to intervene as well. Yeah. And I think so. It's great that we are having this conversation, and we have a corporate sector, and we have a public sector here, and we have a social sector, and we have, we are all trying to lean in and trying to, bring women into the workforce, be in the formal economy or be in the informal economy. Um, there's a lot of work that government needs to basically institutionalize as well. While the evolved organizations are having this conversation, but there are many organizations we are not yet evolved, where a major chunk of women are getting excluded. So I think so. The government really needs to lean in. As far as the men are concerned, I think Mahin also talked about allyship. That's going to be very important. That the men needs to lean in and needs to be sponsoring, because even for men like us, we have sponsors in our corporate world who kind of mentor us, who kind of guide us, who kind of coach us, and they help us grow in the organization. Likewise, women needs to have allies as well. And I think so. One of the programs that each and every organization should be promoting is allyship program, where women should get proper guidance and mentorship from the senior management in the organization to help move up the corporate ladder. Uh, to be honest, we have stopped while we used to chase the number, what exactly our gender ratios are, and there used to be a lot of push. But I think so at one point in time we started realizing that we are making a mistake, because we were 5 steps forward and 3 steps backward. And reason was that it was more a number game than the merit game. And होता ये है कि अगर आप किसी को कॉम्प्रोमाइज मेरिट के ऊपर ले आए, तो वो लॉन्ग टर्म नहीं होता, फिर वो कहीं ना कहीं पर जाके ट्रिप हो जाता है. And I think so what is important that you need to keep merit on the top, but you have to really but that you got to then push yourself hard. For example, when I say at Unilever, for any job it's mandatory there has to have a girl. Yeah. And the girl has to be on a competitive. And if you fail to find a girl within the organization, then you need to go outside the organization. You need to carry out a recce in the market, and you need to still find a woman who needs to compete and who can compete. So all these kind of efforts will bring a change. These efforts are being made, and I think so all of us are seeing this change all around us. We are finding women in a restaurant industry. We are finding women in the ticketing counters. Women have always been in the in the medicine area. Lot more women basically is coming into corporate sectors now. I think so there are 1-2 segments which are still struggling. Like for example, we struggle in sales to bring in women. We have the lowest diversity ratio, and we struggle in the factories and supply chain. But I think so we are all committed. We are all basically trying to lean in, and I'm very positive, and I think so we will be able to bring more women, and that is more fairer. And also from economic perspective, keeping women out of the workforce is actually costing the global economy per annum $12 trillion US of a loss. And I think so if you really want to promote economy, we have to bring in women. And women are talented as men do. And I think so let's largely talk about our informal labor force. And I'm always impressed. I particularly do not agree with this global statistic that Pakistan stand 151 out of 153, because when you go into the fields, it's the women who are working, not the men, and they are the one who are doing the most laborious job. Yeah, they may not be from the formal economy, they are from informal economy, but I think so our women are practically working a lot more harder than men do.
No, all of these are very, very valid point, Amir, and you're right, especially when talking about informal economy, that when women play a large role in the informal economy, and even basic household domestic work, a lot of women don't get don't get their due share in terms of any payment or anything. So women are working a lot more than they're getting paid for example. So there are a lot of unpaid work that women are also doing. So Sadia, I would actually like to come back to you for maybe a reaction on something that Amir also mentioned about including women in difficult sectors like the sales sector. And I think Kay was able, like you were talking about Roshni Baji. So maybe a little bit about what were the factors, what was the ecosystem that you were able to create to get these women, and also to touch on what Maheen talked about, normalizing CV gaps, because I know that Kay also has started a program to bring women who've been out of the workforce for some time. So I'd like to hear about that as well.
So I'm going to do the normalized CV gaps because that's a lot easier than the other one. So returnship or you know enabling women who've taken a career break to come back to work, it's a bit daunting, and you have to understand that as women, while we're not very good at negotiating for ourselves, we've got this constant math going on in our head. We're very good with sort of keeping things under tab, and it has to be worthwhile. So if you're going to give up, and I'm talking from the experience that a lot of women I know in my life, work life and personal life, who have shared, is that when you have children or you have a family, there's a lot of responsibility upon you, and you're always sort of making that, is it worth it, and can I do it? And there's of course separation anxiety. So there is a global concept, and I think Unilever was one of the first companies to put that into practice in Pakistan. We've got examples from Telenor, Nestle, Jazz, Philip Morris, KE. I think there are more companies who've done this. Is that you need to find sort of a way where you create an eased way back into the workforce. One, of course, and then Jahan would nod emphatically, technology is changing really fast. So 10 years ago, we didn't have WhatsApp did not exist. Today, I mean, everything's just happening so fast on WhatsApp. You're sort of trying to catch up. So it's also a way to sort of give a women the ability to sort of get accustomed to the corporate routine. Well, thanks to COVID, that's also changing now in a more traditional setup where you require 9 to 5 work hours, which should, I think, unless it's a manufacturing, mechanical, or shift operations, it should no longer be a requirement. You should have flexible timings. So that's one thing. So when you normalize CV gaps, and you also sort of take away this fear that if I'm going to take a break for my family, I will have a place in the workforce when I come back. So that comfort is very important. So again, policy, example, and then a lot more people following that example. And sharing these success stories, making them part of programs is very important. That's why more and more companies will sort of take and build on. आज से 15 साल पहले very few companies had proper maternity policies. Hardly anyone had daycare facilities. Today, it's still not, we're not there yet, but it's getting a lot better. And now we're talking about lactation rooms, women-friendly areas, and sort of growing that panel. The other part about creating the ecosystems there, you and I have had a lot of conversations around this, is so one part is where women leaders or male and female leaders, organizations, they can create opportunities, they can create a pace and allow women to come in. We did a lot of it was hard. We did a lot of introspection. अजीब सी बात है but सच्ची बात है कि I have lost a lot more men to Canada than I have lost female colleagues to family. लेकिन किसी ने आके मेरे कान में whisper नहीं किया कि आप ना stop hiring men because they just feel like migrating at some point in life. Nobody says these things, right? And the thing is that it was difficult. So, we were putting that ecosystem in place. There was a lot of discussion around how will they manage in the field, what, men in the field go to a KFC. And I like the answer that Maheen gave. How do you manage your work-life balance? Same as men do. So when I was asked this question, you're talking about putting women in the field, what if they have to go to use the loo? I said, what do men do when they have to use the loo? They said, they go to the nearest KFC. I said, she'll go to the nearest KFC also. What's the big deal? Actually, there's a height issue. So I said, well, men come in all shapes and sizes. What do? They borrow a stool from someone. She
Yeah.
could do the same. Well, actually, they did one better. We had that problem because average height is shorter, so they experience that a lot more. And they came up with the use of selfie sticks. So they put their phones on a selfie stick, took the picture,
Smart.
because in the meter reading, you have to see what the meter is saying, you have to note down the numbers. So they innovated. So you have to give that base, that comfort and cushion. But this is my perspective on how it worked. If you talk to Shahida, who's the first female leader who ever joined the field work at K Electric, her perspective is totally different. One day she said, आपने मुझे job दिया. This is her perspective. And she says, I had to do so much. And when we started putting in more women, we sat down with her and we let her tell us what the issues were. And she spoke about all of the things, Kiji. The workaround, the route optimization should be in their control. They should be able to plan their days. They don't need to do so. They said, give us targets. If you say I need to cover 40 households in a day, just tell me I need to cover 40 households in a day, and then whether I do them between 8 to 10 or 8 to 12. And she introduced the concept of flexi timings. So these are the things that you need to put in, but you also have to sort of find the right resources. I think one of the biggest problems is honestly finding the right resource and finding enough women to fill the role. But once you get in there, now we have so much word of mouth. I mean, I was jokingly telling the team that runs Roshni Baji that the measure of success of the program is कि अब रोशनी बाजी program के लिए भी सिफारिश आ रही है. So we've got a lot of women applying. We had 60 women join the cohort this year. We had 400 applicants. So anybody out there who's looking for female candidates for roles, top to bottom, anywhere, we've got a huge resume pool. And the ecosystem sort of builds itself. So you just have to sort of put the first leg in, and then it sort of starts building itself. And this is where we need to stop thinking for women. I think not only men do it, but as women leaders, we also tend to do it from time to time. We start thinking. The truth is that as human beings, our perspective and our thoughts and our solutions are mired in our own experiences, and our experiences are limited, right? So when Yasmin ji was talking about the women who are working, don't have access to education and they need skills training, it's a whole different concept. I've not thought like that. So it is important that we don't think for them, and we let them come in and figure it out as well. So yes, an ecosystem is necessary. Yes, safety, mobility should be ensured, but that should not be the barrier to let them have a go at it. Some of them have training in martial arts, mixed martial arts, and maybe they can take care of that.
No, that's a very valid point, and it comes back to the idea of having seat at the table. So being there to express yourself and not have someone else representing you, who are not even from the same gender. So small things like this is probably the first time NASA made spacesuit that is gender neutral. We always think I honestly didn't know that spacesuits are not gender neutral, but are exactly. I thought they were always like it's for men and women, but they were not. So this is literally in this day and age. Now is the time when suits were made. This is the first time there'll be a mission for all women astronauts. So just having the seat at the table and being able to be part of the decision making just improves the entire process for everyone. Like I think it was briefly mentioned about access to public transportation, women use public transport differently from men. But if we don't have any women up there in designing or planning, then we have no say there and how it impacts us. So we have very little time left, but I would really want to do a round and would ask all of you amazing women to give any closing remarks and any guidance for young women trying to enter the workforce. Maybe Jahan, if you could specifically touch on STEM fields and how we should incentivize women to get into the STEM fields where we have little representation of women. So maybe we can start with Ms. Larry, and then we can do an anti-clockwise movement.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll try to make my remarks rather short. You see, I'm really concerned because I know there's optimism. I know things are improving, but I've lived a long life, and I see, of course, change is there, but not enough, and that's what worries me, because I think the levels of disparities are far greater now. I think the poverty levels are much higher than ever before, and it seems to me like we are living in a world in which we feel that we're okay, but when you go out there, you know that you are not okay. And so where is that understanding, and how do we bridge this gap, this particular divide that I see all the time between people who have everything and people who have nothing? And there's not, seems to be nothing in between, and there's no bridging. Can technology do it? I don't know. Can corporate sector do it? I don't know. I mean, we are trying. Like this time, the bank, I said the loans will only go to women. So they are, the loans are being given to these 4 committees composed of women, and the loans will be in their name. And although they don't own the land, because no poor owns any land. So, I mean, the levels of deprivation are so high uh, for everybody, and particularly for women, it's an impossible task. But unless we're out there, people who know, who can impart knowledge and expertise and more thinking for this today's world, how will they get better? How will they improve? Because they have no idea even. They're living in these isolated places. I don't know कि आप लोग कभी उधर गए भी हैं कि नहीं गए हैं, लेकिन जो हालात हैं वो अच्छे नहीं हैं। और वहाँ अगर आप जाइए तो आप दूर दूर तक तो मतलब सिंध में तो गांव जो है वो खुदा जानते हैं कितने कितनी दूर होते हैं। आप जाइए तो आपको पता नहीं चलता दूसरा गांव कितनी दूर है। वो तो कभी किसी से उनकी मुलाकात तक नहीं होती है एक दूसरे के साथ। वो लोग क्या करेंगे? तो मैं तो बस यही चाहती हूँ कि हर गांव में मैं अब कोशिश कर रही हूँ कि मैं एक वुमेन सेंटर बना दूँ, वहाँ पे उनके एक मॉनिटर लगा दूँ, एक कंप्यूटर दे दूँ और कहूँ भाई तुम लोग हमसे बातें करो, आपस में बातें करो। Or I wish that there was a whole force of people from here who are so knowledgeable and have all the expertise to just talk to these women. Even that will just open up their minds, and that will open up a whole new world for them. But are there enough people who will do this? Are really interested to talk to them? And I mean, I don't know really. So I'm afraid, but I don't feel too good. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Lai. That was a very important message, and I think that it leads on to the need for women and men to get out on the field, to go beyond, like you said, and like Jharra also mentioned, instead of just focusing on the 3 big cities, like the outskirts of the cities, and see what the situation on ground. And I would personally like to connect with you separately as well on this and see if there is any way we can engage or devise a plan. Jharra, please go ahead.
Yes, so I think the way to attract more women to join STEM fields is very simple. From day one, I think within the home, we need to be telling our daughters, our sisters, nieces, whoever we come into contact with, that there is nothing about technology or science that is restrictive for young girls to get into. When we are getting them gifts, make sure we give them lab equipment, we give them things that they can create and develop things with rather than just dolls. There's nothing wrong with dolls, but it should not be the only gift that we give young women. And I've seen that, when you give them things that they can build with, that they can experiment with, you will see young girls are just as interested as young boys in trying them out, right? So that is the first level where we need to intervene. Second level is at schools. In schools, colleges, universities, teachers and professors need to be much more responsible in the way they engage with students. They are also guilty of telling many young women that this is not an area that they should pursue. And that's something that needs to change. Then the next level is all of us, whether we are in organizations, whether we are part of NGOs, whether we are part of the corporate sector or part of the startup ecosystem. Everyone that we engage with at universities, at schools, we need to be talking about the different professions that are available. And I know many organizations are trying to do that by introducing women and men who are in different fields and who have been very successful in those fields, especially STEM. STEM, you see young girls creating robots and, working with them, playing with them, coding, and making sure that they enable them to do things that they want done. So I think it's nothing that's out of this world. If you go and see what Sabrina Dawood has created here in Karachi, that is again the kind of space that we should take young girls to, so that they can see technology or STEM at work. And when they see it, when they're excited by it, then they will look at that field of study as something that they want to do. We need to start encouraging that from the lowest level, from the youngest child who is within our space to the oldest. It doesn't mean, I mean, I didn't start off with tech as my base. I started off being a writer. Even until I was in my 20s, I had not really realized the importance of tech until I started using a computer and then said, okay, this is what it can do. So, use of technology, as I said earlier, is now a necessity. So, once they start using technology, once they start using computers and smartphones, then they will understand what more can be done with it. And then you will see more and more women coming into the STEM field because they will feel they want to join fields of study that enable them to create impact. And that will only happen if they understand the power of technology. So I think that's what all of us need to do, is to make sure that they're aware of it, and make sure that the ones that we engage with, we talk them into at least looking at it as an option. And we see now, whether it's in Singapore, whether it's here, whether it's in Malaysia, everywhere around us, Indonesia, we see there are programs especially meant to attract young women into the STEM area. I've been to schools in Sujani Town, etc., with some youngsters, young founders who have decided that they are going to take this up as a mission. And they've taken me, said, let's go and talk to these young girls and young boys and try and convince them of the power of STEM. And so I've spent an entire day there. And, there has been nothing that has caused me more pleasure than doing that, because you see their eyes light up when they see what they can do with technology. And this young man had taken kits with him that he made sure that the youngsters had available to them, and they saw what they could do and they were using it themselves. That's how you make it happen. So Mrs. Lari is absolutely right. Somebody's got to fund this exercise, whether it's the corporate sector, whether it's the government, whether it's us, all of us in some small way, because none of us sort of have the kind of money that is needed to spread this much technology across the board. Maybe everybody together can do that. Once children start playing with technology, then their interest in technology develops. So I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you
Just
so
very
much.
short.
Ji, please go ahead.
On Jharra's, Jharra, what's happening today is that they are willing to pay. The poor are willing to pay as long as it can be affordable. So it's not that they want just that you should give them everything. They are willing to participate in the whole thing. That's what we are not mobilizing. And we can do a hell of a lot of work with very little money. Not much money is needed. Of course, with technology, you will need, probably these are all expensive. There must be cheaper brands. There must be cheaper ways of also doing this. So let's find a way where it makes it affordable for them also in some way. I mean, they can make.
And then somebody then needs to work with them as well. I think that's the more challenging part.
But also, you can do a lot of things remotely now. My houses are being built by everybody. The poor are building themselves by just going through the YouTube. But women don't have cell phones. That is the biggest issue. They're not the ones who have them. But find a way. You guys can find a way to do this cheaply. I mean, inexpensively, not cheaply. And somehow let them participate. They will pay. I mean, when I said you're going to get a loan, I said start looking at savings. 50 rupees a day, every woman is saving. These 100 women, every day they're saving 50 rupees. That's nothing. They've never done it before. So it is possible. It's possible to do it. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lari and Jharra. And Maheen, I'll quickly come to you, and maybe if you can closing remarks, but also very briefly, role of big corporations in providing support.
Okay, thank you. And I think I started the discussion by saying that I don't think there's any time to be a woman better now than in Pakistan, because there's just so much conversation going on around this. However, given that we sit at the bottom of the gender equity index, this is not something one company, one sector, one organization will be able to do on their own. This requires significant government support, private sector support, and overall, I would say mindset shifts, that this is an important policy area to focus on. I think when it comes to private sector, big corporations, look, you can keep tapping those. Those are, CSR budgets, community outreach. K Electric has done a lot of work in this area. More and more, the focus is on ESG in governments, but the private sector is just one piece of the pie, right? It's not the whole pie. And I think this is where we should not absolve government from their role in developing the ecosystems to educate women and to bring them into schemes. For example, we have Kamyab Jawan that has been talked about so heavily. You have the SAS and BIS programs that have been run by the federal government. These are all there, and they can be tailored to empower women. BISP already does, but the Kamyab Jawan is certainly something that could have had that element in there as well. I think you've had policy frameworks from the State Bank, from the SECP on having gender frameworks. A clear follow-up from the regulators in this regard is needed. The reality is we have close to 30-40 million children out of school. And, that's not something the private sector or any NGO is going to be able to cover on their own. That's a serious governmental issue. So let's not absolve them of this responsibility. Half of those are girls. And I think finally, when we do discussions such as this, and I think I say this almost every year, but the month of March is dedicated to highlighting women's issues, etc. But this is a year-long struggle. It is not something that just for the month of March we will have all these panel discussions and everything. There should be key takeaways, key roundtables perhaps arranged after this, and actual concrete steps taken, both private sector, government level engagements, and so forth, that to really push this forward. I'll always give the example of women on boards who campaigned very heavily to have one female director on every listed company board. And that took many years to come through. And the interesting thing is when it finally came through, there was so much resistance in the corporate sector against this one change, despite all the other changes that had also taken place in the corporate governance rules. So there will be resistance. It happens. When I was on the board of PICG, we campaigned to have more women directors than the law required. The law required one. We eventually ended up with 33% of the board has to be female directors. So, sometimes without affirmative action in Pakistan, you will not see, the role of women being any more significantly enhanced than we have today. It's going to take a lot more than panel discussions. And I think we have to really think post this month, how are we going to carry this engagement forward at the corporate level, government level, private sector, and at the social level, which is what Ms. Lari is doing. So, those would be my final thoughts on this one. And I hope that we continue to see more engagement from everyone on this on a year-round basis going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maheen. And Sadia, I'll give you, 1 minute, because we literally have 2 minutes to wrap up.
So I think insane amounts of good things said. We need to go beyond the lip service. I agree with everything that's been said here. We need to do a lot more concrete stuff and sort of measure if the needle is moving or not. We're still not there yet, nowhere near close. So a lot more work needs to be done from the informal sector, moving that into the formal economy, making sure that the rights are equal, the treatment is equal, the pay is equal, and the opportunities are equitable as well. So that's pretty much it. Everybody needs to do it together. It takes a village to raise a child. It's probably going to take a planet to elevate the gender.
Yeah, it's a big feat. But thank you so much, ladies. And Amir left, but thanks to Amir as well for being here for 2 hours with me, for having such interesting discussion, for sharing your thoughts, and all the work that you've been doing in different fields and trying to push for more gender parity in your respective areas. So thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate the point, Maheen, when you mentioned that concrete steps should be taken. So maybe I will try and personally connect with the Nutshell team to see if we can come up with a few next steps. And also with Ms. Lari, I would want to connect and see how we can engage different organizations to try and do something, or at least plan and sit together. So thank you so much for your time as well. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.
Right. Goodbye. Bye.